So are we able to see who's popping in? Oh, here we
Oh,
go.
now we're broadcasting. Great.
Yes.
So, good evening, Augustonians. Welcome back to Lit Fridays. As always, we have something very exciting for you. We have a studio tour with visual artist and literary intellectual Dominic Chambers. And joining us also is the curator at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, Kilolo Luckett, who's also the curator of Dominic's upcoming solo show that opens September 18th, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to be mounting, well, not we, the center, Kilolo's, via Kilolo's curation, is going to be mounting the actual painting. So you will be able to kind of peruse the galleries and come see the work that's up by Dominic. And we're really excited. So just a note for your calendars, on August 28th at 6 p.m., we have visual artist and scholar Dr. Fahamo Piku coming in to be in conversation with author and filmmaker Nelson George. So that's going to come up then. So you don't want to miss that. And now I'm going to read Dominic and Kilolo's bios. Dominic Chambers is a New Haven-based artist from St. Louis, Missouri. Chambers received his BFA from the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design and an MFA from Yale University School of Art in 2019. Chambers creates large-scale paintings and drawings that reference literary narratives cited in books, various mythologies, and African American history. Specifically, working through color field paintings, his current work is invested in exploring moments of contemplation and meditation through reading and leisure. His work is founded upon the relationship between reality and fantasy. At this illusory boundary, Chambers negotiates ideas of magical realism by presenting Black figures as they delve into literature and contemplation within imagined landscapes. These subtle, leisurely moments not only celebrate each subject's visionary power, but further negate pervasive and toxic cliches, instead focusing on Black talent, creativity, and mysticism. Chambers has exhibited his work in exhibitions in the United States and Europe. He has participated in a number of residencies, including the Yale Norfolk Summer Residency and the New York Studio Residency Program in Brooklyn, New York. He has been featured in publications that include Cultured Magazine, Hypebeast, and ArtNet, where he was featured as one of the 5 emerging artists you should definitely know. Kilolo Luckett is an art historian, curator, and writer. With over 20 years of brilliant experience in arts administration and cultural production, she is committed to elevating the voices of underrepresented visual artists, specifically women of color, women and artists of color. She is consulting curator of visual arts at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center and serves as an art commissioner for the City of Pittsburgh's Art Commission. She is a recent founder and executive director of Alma-Lewis, named after abstract artists Alma Thomas and Norman Lewis, an experimental contemporary art platform for critical thinking, dialogue, and creative expression dedicated to Black culture. Kilolo has curated exhibitions by national and international artists such as Peju Alatis, Martha Jackson Jarvis, Amani Lewis, Thaddeus Mosley, Rashad Newsom, Taj Rust, Devin Shimoyama, and Stephen Towns. As an art consultant, Kilolo was recently curator of Facebook Pittsburgh's Artists in Residency program. Additionally, she was a cultural consultant for Atelier Ace and worked as a cultural attaché for Ace Hotel Pittsburgh. She created By Any Means, an art series that engages directly with leading cultural figures to broaden the scope and understanding of contemporary art influence by Black culture. Kilolo also served as managing director of the Homewood Artists Residency and was director of development for the Andy Warhol Museum. She served as the curatorial assistant at Wood Street Galleries, where she helped organize shows by Shu Bing, Louise Borges, Larry Bell, Catherine Opie, Nam June Peck, and Tim Rollins, plus KOS, to name a few. She is a contributing writer to the exhibition publication Halston and Warhol, Silver and Suede. Kilolo is also writing an authorized biography of Naomi Sims, one of the first Black supermodel. She received her BA in art history and architecture from the University of Pittsburgh. She was a recipient of the 2015 Mayor's Award for Public Art and for the Homewood Artist Residency and Women and Girls Foundation Women in the Material World Award. Kilolo was an honoree of the 50 Women of Excellence by the New Pittsburgh Courier. She is a former board member for the Braddock Carnegie Library Association, the first library funded by Andrew Carnegie, YMCA Homewood Branch, and Design Center of Pittsburgh. She's been featured in national and international publications, including Point Line Projects, Hypebeast, Sugarcane and Black Art in America, where she was named one of the 20 curators to follow on Instagram. And in her spare time, while being absolutely amazing, Kilolo mentors young people, takes advantage of the great bicycle trails of Southwestern PA, and nerds out in libraries and archives. And we are very, very happy to have the both of you with us. So now I'm going to invite Dominic to share the literary piece you want to read to us, and then Kilolo will follow.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. It was beautiful. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, Kilolo, for being in conversation with me during this evening. And so if you give me a second, I'll pull it up. Okay. So the literary piece I chose, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, if you're not, you should be, Jericho Brown. Recently released a new book, The Tradition, which is a book of poems that I have been going to back and forth between Langston Hughes's book, The Weary Blues, and The Tradition. It's just great because there's shorter, stories and soliloquies about life that I find myself really attracted to. So this is Jericho Brown's I Begin with Love. I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. And let's see, some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need last need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who leave me are men who miss me. In the dream where I am an island, in the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I like to end there. So I chose that particular poem for a number of reasons. And two, is this idea that, this idea of like self-reflection or self-accountability, looking into oneself and examining what our potential sicknesses are. As Jericho outlines in his story, in his poem, his oftentimes is this pursuit of love, right? Pursuit of intimacy. And those who oftentimes love him are the ones who are not there or not there continuously, right? So it's this pursuit of something, but that self-reflection is, I think, key, right? Especially when it comes to our relationship to love, because I think it's something that speaks to a kind of self-determination, because he starts the poem off with, I begin with love, hoping to end there, right? And I think that's kind of the journey of a lot of Black Americans. We start with life, hoping to end there, hoping to end with freedom, hoping to end with something else, right? Like, my mom always told me, she wanted to give me the schools, to, like the skills or the tools to be okay, right? To be able to like thrive in like some kind of place. And that was kind of like my approach to life. Like I just wanted to be okay. So I started okay, hoping to end there. Now I think that's how, a lot of us relate to our own kind of existence, And so I find myself attracted to like that, that play on words, like that kind of self-reflection, And then one of my favorite parts is in the dream where I am an island. Right, like that's the magical realism side of it, right? Where you can see yourself as this grandiose thing, right? What is an island? An island is a place where you can retreat to. It's a place that offers nourishment. I love thinking about that, like, thinking about your body as a transformative thing or something capable of transforming into something that, could sustain a larger group of people, right? That to me is a metaphor for like your cultural impact or your relevance. Like we recently lost John Lewis. He was our island, like he was an island where we would go to for words or wisdom and guidance. Like for a lot of people, that's what he symbolized,
Or the suddenness of an island too, right? Like they sit under the water and then all of a sudden one day they appear to us. Like that suddenness of being is surreal as well.
Yeah, and I love, love thinking about, like that's his relationship to the world, And John Lewis, he did end there, to this one, even when he died, he still left, his words post his death that we're now turning to now in the New York Times, right? And I just thought that was such a profound way to think about our existence, and just what it means is like to be, different things that you're wrestling with. And I think like my interest in words and like how language is used really does carry out through like, writers that I appreciate, or even how I think about different artists that I appreciate,
That was wonderful.
Example. Sorry for that diatribe.
No, that was great. That was amazing.
The Tradition. Jericho Brown his words are absolutely beautiful.
Like, he just won the Pulitzer.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's great. And if you don't get The Tradition, read the New Testament,
Yes.
Like he's amazing.
Right. Thank you so much, Dominic. Kilolo?
Wow, that was beautiful, Dom. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Dom. So I'm going to read from American Sublime by Elizabeth Alexander, and this was published in 2005. And the poem that I selected is called American Sublime. And this really, I just came back to this poem. I come back to it time and time again, but in particularly because of Dom and how he moves and operates and behaves in spaces within the paintings and the worlds that he exists. And just him also as just a wonderful human being and his presence in the world and the energy that he exudes. And then also there's a relationship that I see with this poem to my curatorial practice. So I'm going to read American Sublime. At the same time, American paintings wherein the biodynamic landscape explodes in flames, ice, violent sunshine that seems to burn the canvas, apocalyptic nature that roils and terrifies, the beautiful, small scale, gentle luminosity, sublime, territorial, vast, craggy, undomesticated, borderless, immense, unknown, awful, monumental, transcendent, transcending. Go west, and west, young man, to blinding snowstorms, leave shark-infested waters, shipwrecks without slaves, miraculous black holes of color large enough to blot out the sun, obliterate the unending moans, to exalt, to take the place of lamentation. And then also the cover, she uses the Henry Osawa Tanner image of the Annunciation. And then this light, this luminosity. So, and also that this figure is not really aware of the viewer. They're in their own, transcendence. So that's just something that I return to. And just her use of words, this imaginary, this space, this imaginary landscape going west, not only in terms of location, but I see it more of this psychological space of the mind, the interior of the psychology of west, of say the conjuring of the sunset and the warmth and the comfort. And so that's just something else that really spoke to me in this beautiful poem. So yeah.
She's also an amazing poet.
You just had Dom all over it too.
And I'll just note too that these are like Cave Canem poets.
Oh, right. Yeah.
These are both Cave Canem poets, of which I am one as well.
Yes.
Yes, Cave Canem.
Yeah. So yeah, I love Elizabeth Alexander. And of course her connection to Yale. I mean, it's just funny how like it's all, we're all connected here. We're all connected. So yeah. All right.
There's always 6 degrees hiding somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So tell us about the upcoming show. Tell us the title, how you guys came to imagine the show together. What were you thinking about Dominic, and how did you interact with Dominic's world building in his works?
So I'll guess. So it's kind of interesting how the show developed. I think it developed just through a conversation that Kilolo and I had together, and I was working on a body of work that was focused on this idea of the veil, and like Kilolo and I both are huge fans of Alma Thomas's work, and like we had that in common. We love art history and we love talking about history together. And so I was working on this body of work that dealt with, in a very explicit way, like this idea of the veil, which was borrowed from W.E.B. Du Bois's book, Souls of Black Folks. And that was like a huge thing for like my work for a while. And Kilolo pitches this idea to me to like, potentially show, that body of work, right? Around this like Du Boisian idea of the concept of the veil and how I was thinking about it in relationship to like the broader art world in my life and the political climate that we found ourselves in, between 2019, 18, and 17, right? So she pitched this idea and, we kind of started talking about how my work was developing, because I tend to develop ideas like quickly and like they elaborate because I'm like alone and I think a lot. And I'm always reading something and like that's giving me a whole new set of ideas too. And yeah, so my work evolved, and we really stayed in contact about this, and we talked about, you know, potentially doing the show earlier this year, you know, but even once things got postponed, you know, we never left. We knew it was important for these ideas or these pieces to be shown, especially in the August Wilson Center, which is a historical, you know, Black space, because August Wilson was an incredible playwright, you know.
Yes.
And, you know, so like our relationships, like literature and like the significance, you know, we felt like, all right, we definitely should do this show, you know, like everything was lining up at once post COVID. So like that was a bit of a pain. So
Thanks for
yeah,
hanging
Alexander,
in
yeah.
Yeah, really.
We could actually capitalize on it. It can happen. So like, thank goodness. So, but the work developed, right? So like, even then, like the work's developed even more, you know, like, you know, we're still thinking about the veil, but now I'm complicating it in a different way. Right. And so I have 3 different bodies of work, all negotiating different things. And you'll see that as we go through the tour here. And the title of the show is called Like the Shape of Clouds on Water, which is taken from a little short story I'm working on. And so it's about double consciousness. And a line that I wrote was that, so anyways, in the little short story, it has this person named David who exists in one plane of existence, right? And as you examine or you read the little short story, you learn to find out that, you know, David is actually a product of someone else's imagination. So he never really existed, you know? So it's like this double consciousness. And as he approaches, he goes on this like journey of self-realization, right? Like a self-determined journey. And it takes him to the Atlantic Ocean, right? Which is how all of us got here, you know, to America. And he says that he sees his ancestors rise from the ocean, like, and they dance like clouds on water, right? And I love thinking about that. So, you know, thinking about the history of how we got here and the fact that the kind of torturous place that the Atlantic Ocean has been for us is now somewhat of like a space that connects us back to our motherland. It's a place of transition and change, and also a place of protection, right? Like if somehow our journey into the Americas may have been exceptionally complicated, right? But now with a degree of self-realization and self-determination, when we chart our way back home, we'll be protected by those who have, you know, preceded us. So I love thinking about it in that sense, but it's like a little short story. And I really like the idea of like, you know, like the shape of clouds on water, you know.
That's a beautiful phrase.
Yeah, they're not tangible things, right? It's like when you actually describe it, it's all about like your imagination. Like that's what you felt, you know. But I also stole that from a book, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera, where it outlines Russia's occupation of Czechoslovakia. And when the Czechoslovakian citizens were protesting, you know, for their liberation, they danced in a circle, right? And in the story of the book, while they're dancing as a form of protest, they levitate, they're transcended into the heavens, right? Like that did not happen like in the actual, like in real life, right? But I love thinking about that, right? These people who like fought for liberation through dancing or like this active dance over a land that's been occupied. Will still like
the premise of the story, right? The self-determination of the imagined figure is something that's very tangible in the history of like global Black writing. Helen Oyeyeme in Mr. Fox talks about the muse of a writer literally invading the world, and she runs away to Mexico and she lives her own life. And that's like her imagination is like, you know, a Nigerian British writer. And then you also have Sophie's World is not by a Black author, but Sophie's World is about this idea we have as humans of our imaginations fluxing into reality. And so it's like, what does become real, you know, when you have the space to kind of be eclectic like this in your art.
And exactly, and you know, and I think about the act of prayer, right? Like this idea. Oh God, sorry about that.
Add them to the call. No.
Sorry about that. So the idea of like a prayer. So the book that probably generated my entire body of work, like even pre-Yale, was The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which talked about, you know, magical realism and its relationship to the Dominican Republic. But one of the things I thought was so ingenious about Yona Diaz's writing was that if you wanted to think about magical realism, if anyone told you magical realism didn't exist, they would be wrong. Because with Yona Diaz, you know, the act of praying, like there was a scene where like the grandmother prayed for her daughter and hoping that her daughter was safe, you know? And prayer is a form of magical realism, that through this chant or like this prayer to this deity, like something will, some divine intervention may happen, or like, you know, intervening in your life. Like if that isn't surrealism, I don't know what is. Like humans don't have the capacity to do that, right? But it's like through faith or like, this act of conjuring this will, which requires, total self-determination, And, because when you're praying, that's when you're probably your most self, right? You're stationary, you're communing with the world around you, But yeah, I just love thinking about how I can relate these ideas, like real world scenarios. And you and Diaz did that beautifully with that book.
Or even Marquez, you mentioned him in an interview,
Yes.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez,
Both.
he's a Colombian writer. And his work, 100 Years of Solitude. And then that made me think of Zora Neale Hurston, strangely enough, and her relationship to magical realism, like being kind of the mother of like magical realism in terms of like, the autobiomythology of a people, right? Like it's not something that you can couch in terms of real or not. They're happenings. They're things that happen in the mind and then appear in other people's memories of something that they saw, as far as like a symbolic connection that you have as far as like being in the Americas and being Black, and in some instances beyond. So it's a really just like strong tradition that we have in our literature, in the global South and other places, to impose this will, right? Because most of the people, when they came here, regardless of their intent, usually what they had was their sense of faith and belief in abundance, which drove them, all different kinds of people across the Atlantic. It just drove everyone across. Loss, incarceration drove them here, being sent away from Europe, being, trapped and sold off the coast of West Africa. Like everything everybody took with them in their extremists usually had something to do with faith.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting even more about that is that, what I love about Zora Neale Hurston's writing, like if you've ever read the introduction, which is one of the most beautiful introductions to a book, I would say even more so than 100 Years of Solitude, because the first paragraph of 100 Years of Solitude is absolutely beautiful. But Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, that intro is absolutely powerful, right? Ships at a distance hold every man's dream on board. For some, they come to shore. For others, they remain at sea, their dreams marked away by time. Now, women, oh my God, I can go off on it. Now, women, that is the life of men. For women, they remember everything they need and everything they do not, and they continue to move forward, right? That is power, like that is absolutely beautiful. She talked about the magic of like Black women, right? The fact that you have to self-realize yourself as a woman, and you were stood on by Black men, white women, and white men, right? And as she highlights so beautifully, like these things that men chase, right? That's not the life of women, right? Women have learned how to survive in different circumstances, no matter what, right? Because without them, this planet wouldn't exist, right? Like the first person to give birth was a woman. Like the idea of like creation from this person, like the Venus of Willendorf, right? Like that is our historical object that talks about the fertility of a woman.
And she's like literally like this big.
Yeah, so it's like that is power to me, right? Like this kind of like mythos around a certain body, right? And like that's why I think we also need to think about body politics, or even what it means like be a woman, like Sojourner Truth, ain't I a woman, right? Like this idea of understanding that by virtue of you being a woman, like that is probably that's a different kind of existence. Like that is a magical existence.
Right.
You literally give and create life. That is an incredible responsibility. So like I just tops off to that.
So I do have a question. In a lot of your interviews, and even when you speak, there's this transition between fantasy, imagination, and the surreal. For you, what's the difference between the three? How do they work together if they are even different? So
like, that's a good question. So I mean, a lot of times when people think about like this, so for me, magical realism is like surreal. Like for me, those terms are interchangeable, right? So surrealism does, covet our existence, right? Fantasy, however, I do think is a heavier term because it does acknowledge that it is a fantasy, right? It is fiction, right? Like that is something you must acknowledge as a truth, right? For example, Harry Potter. We all know like that shit's fantasy, right? There's no assumption that motherfuckers are flying on brooms, like all in the air, like, right? We know the role that it's meant to have, right? It's fiction, right? But the surreal aspect of it, like sur and then like real, right? Sur also being like a big part of that word, right? Which acknowledges that it's a second level from real, surrealism. And so it's acknowledgement that these things can potentially happen, right? Or if you think about like the way history is constructed or the things that humans have been able to achieve, like we have a very like surreal narrative, like the entire Black Atlantic, transition, like that shit is very surreal. You mean to tell me that someone gathered millions of bodies and transported them across different islands and they were stacked on each other. If my kids read that, they'd be like, wait, what, this happened? Right? It's like, but the fact that these people still exist and we have learned to like integrate, like in Brazil, you can find traditions of like their heritage that traces all the way back to like their Yoruba tradition.
Yeah,
Right?
Egungun is still a widely practiced ceremony and a highly guarded one in Bahia.
Right. And so I love that this idea that these people brought magic with them and it permeated throughout different cultures, no matter where they were landed. Haiti, the DR, like places that, you know, magic is a big part of their culture. Cuba, right? And that plays into everything. Like Cuba, like these traditions all come from like those people, right? These people had such a different relationship to the world around them, right? You know, like they worshiped like sun and moon gods, you know?
Well, that's a difference between being in the world and of it.
Exactly. You know, being in the world, you're here. But then being a part of it or being of it, this means you can transcend, right? You're no longer bound by like rationality.
Right.
And I love that, you know, and like that's what black people have always had to release the chains of rationality, right? Like if someone told you that it's rational and logical that you should not read, that you should not be able to speak well, and if you do, we'll kill you. That's your only option. Mm-hmm. Like black people had to break those chains off to imagine a different kind of way of, you know, engaging with the world around them, you know, like that to me, and you have to do that every single day. Like, right. Are you going to work for this person and enslave yourself? No, our imagination is the only thing that we have that no one can beat us at, right? Like we've had to learn how to imagine a different world, and we're still helping others out with that. They come to us, right?
Right.
Us for
people are ready to make that change in their nation or in their community. They're always returning to, and sometimes in their subsequent scholarship, erasing the Blackness of their bibliography and to inspire themselves.
Yeah.
So Kilolo, how did you step as a curator into these worlds, interact with Dominic? How did you, what was like finding your way?
Well, I mean, some of the books that we have spoken about, and then when I initially did visit with Dom, and walking into his studio, and it was very much, I was being transported into another time, literally. Mm-hmm. And so it's one thing to see the work, but then you really, really feel it. And so not only the scale of his work, but also the figures, the storytelling that exists within these imaginative spaces, but they're also very much real as much as they are imagined. And what really struck me about Dom's work through abstraction and figuration is his relationship to the people that occupy these spaces, that he has this personal relationship, this personal narrative, and that those people exist around him while you're going, you're in school. And so a lot of the people in your paintings that will be at the August Wilson Center are your friends, you know them personally, but the way in which you situate them within the pictorial field is just quite, it's so comforting for me. And, I get so emotional when I look at work by people like Dom. And so sometimes I have to fight back tears to get through just having a conversation, because it is very magical. And there's just something about, this ancestral energy that's, flows throughout all of us, Black people. And so sometimes it's just, it's not this tangible thing, it's something that I really, really feel. And so, so that's why I was like, okay, there's some way we have to bring Dom to Pittsburgh and connect him with what's going on, and people need to be exposed to his work because it's quite special. It's quite special. So
show us some of this work.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll see if we do this. And if there's anything you want to see that you feel like I'm like sneaking some shit, like I'm hiding things, just let me know. Just like, hey, what's that over there? You're not showing us that.
Kilolo will call you out.
Yeah, just call me out. Feel free to call me out.
And Dom, you've been working on the work that's going to be at the center in September. You've been working, those works are from late 2019 until now.
Exactly, yeah.
So even some of the people that we know that are in the paintings. So I don't know if any of those are going to be in there. I think I see the one with Cantora on there.
Yeah,
I don't know if Amani's in there, but Amani's painting will be in the show.
I'm gonna say I'm gonna kind of like put you guys in like different stages because I'm on my laptop and I can't give you a full tour adequately without doing it like this. So just bear with me. So I'm gonna have to do it two at a time because my lens is big. But these are two works. These will be at the August Wilson Center. So this one is a dream from me. This is my friend Kevin Briscoe, who was he's also a phenomenal artist, phenomenal painter. We went to Yale together. He recently graduated this year. And this is also Kevin again, and so what's great about, these two paintings in particular is because Kevin has been a reoccurring figure for me, right, in my life. But I think about like my paintings and my practice as a timeline, like a literal timeline of my life in terms of the individuals who are there, right? Like this is very much me at Yale because this is who was in my life. This is me in New Haven, right? And so people who have collected works that have Kevin in it, have paintings with him with dreads, him without dreads, him with short hair, him with long hair. Right, so you see an evolution of that subject in a different painting, almost as though they lived, right?
That's amazing.
And I love thinking about that as though this person you're having, you're actually seeing him grow or change, depending on whichever painting you encounter him in, right? And I love that because his hair was different in both of these paintings, right? And I love that, like kind of recording history. But like this is what I'm getting at about this idea of like magical realism and the power of the Black imagination. So in this particular painting here, and I hope to surmise, give you some kind of context about how I kind of approach, art making in general.
Yeah,
and break down like the magical realism and how I think about it in my work. And this is a great tool to do that. So, oftentimes I do think that when people think about African Americans, especially like, Black men and women, and even the Black trans community, like they don't necessarily associate us to being intellectuals, right? Like we oftentimes understand that like our school systems are oftentimes plagued with, poverty, short accounts, they're oftentimes being shut down, things like that. They lose their accreditation. But it doesn't necessarily correlate to this idea that, Black people are actual intellectual beings, right? We engage with, stories, literature, movies, whatever, right? We live in a world of ideas. And so I wanted to make sure that in any work that I did, there are images of Black bodies that read, people who are also artists that are intellectuals, And it's important.
What does intellectualism mean for you?
Right. So I think intellectualism is just about curiosity, right? You're incredibly curious about the world around you. We're not necessarily chained to what is necessarily presented to us, right? We're seeking out things, we're seeking out knowledge, we're seeking out revision. Like that's kind of what life is. Life is constant revision, right? So you never get it right the first time, but an intellectual is a person who has a set of ideas, who researches those ideas, allows those ideas to be challenged and allows them to be revised, right? Because times things are true until they're not anymore, right? People thought the world was flat until they found out it wasn't, right? And so it's understanding that you don't have to like police yourself in intellectual growth. So like that's what it means for me. And to do that, you have to engage with other people, such as books, right? But in this particular painting, the environment you're seeing doesn't necessarily give you much besides the fact that it's a landscape, right? It's a blue sky, it's a green grass, but the signs presented in the painting are not marked. Right, signs are meant to be a tool to like direct you someplace. Books are oftentimes like things that you assume to have a title, right? They're things that you're expecting to get something from, before you engage with them. But all of this is just a product of his imagination, right? So it allows us into the mind state of a Black body and the beauty that they can transform themselves into when they're allowed to rest, right? So this is what's happening for him. He's laying here in the tree, completely unbothered. And that's another thing for me as well. I never want to put the burden on my subjects to engage with their viewer, right? Like there's enough of that. Like, we always want something for anyone else. We always talk to look someone in your eyes. There's a sense of confrontation. If you don't do so, then you're no longer being respectful, or you're no longer, doing the right thing or behaving in a way that society wants you to. Mm-hmm. And too often Black people, too many people want our attention, right? They look to us for answers. They look to us for that. They want to own us, right? And this idea of the gaze is important for some artists, Amy Sherwood included. I think like they do it. For me, I just like the idea that, my subjects ain't worried about nobody but themselves. And that is a privilege that oftentimes we're not allowed.
I love that they're unbothered.
That's totally real. You have to engage with so many people and perform so often. It's about time that you sit back, you roll your little thing and you just like chill, just coast and relax, But then, so the magic realism, not only is this an imagined space, right, which the little hints are definitely these things here, that this is actively no place, right? It's effectively no place but his imagination.
Utopia.
Yeah, it's a utopia, right, for him. And then there's me. I also, and sometimes in my paintings, as these negative figures, these mischievous, like little spirits that come out to observe or acknowledge something, right? And so that's what this red and this green figure, these are both my body, right? But it allows me to be a part of my subject's imagination, right? As a voyeur, as someone who comes in, I'm either there to engage with them, I'm just there doing my own thing that may be totally nonsensical and have no place at all, right? But it's the fact that in that space, transformative things can happen. And I try to depict that in my work. And so, and that's also what's happening like with this particular painting here, the green one, which is like that space is green. Why? You know, is it because he's reading a book that and the book talks about a green sky or a transformative landscape? Or is it about the history of painting, right? Like I also think about the history of painting as well as a person who is an artist. I do believe that you have to do that. So the fact that this green color field painting, I hope is reminiscent of like a Rothko painting or an Ellsworth Kelly or the history of abstract, you know, expressionist or minimalist that dealt with the idea of the color field, right? But instead of it being a predominantly color field painting, there's a subject in it, right? It's a figurative color field painting. And we'll get back to this one here. And
But it
because,
even kind of transforms the minimalist purpose of color field, right? Because now you have minimalism of purpose in the subject where it's just simplicity and relaxation. It's a protected private space where they're just reading and taking in what they're reading and thinking about it, or even some of your work where people are just kind of lounging and like looking off. Like maybe they have the luxury of thinking of nothing. And I think that's a kind of color filled minimalism or simplicity that comes through, like a transformation of that intent and color field to the subject itself.
Exactly. And I love that you brought that up, you know, because the entire role of like, you know, modernist paintings or like even color field paintings that were minimalist was to be devoid of a political agenda, right? Like there was nothing that would allow you to enter or project this like kind of like idea or mode of engaging with this work outside of formal qualities about that painting, right? Like you looked at the surface, you looked at the texture, you look at line, you look at mark, completely formal, devoid of any of these things, devoid of your identity. And I'm like, no, like what happens when you do inject a certain kind of body within a color field painting, right? Do you hijack that? Does the politics change now? Because when you think about color field paintings, you don't think about, you know, Black artists, right? Like that is the entire genre in itself, you know, and I understand that because the entire history of art, and I'll talk about this.
The racial balkanization prevents Black artists from showing up in the disciplines where they most definitely were present. And so their names aren't known in relation to that as much as it's like singularly and only related to like this Black artist amongst all these other like Black artists, rather than paying attention to also the techniques that they were using.
Yeah, like, you know, like Williams, he loves making art, right? He's much more invested in just the process of making art objects and the history of art, right? Everything else about his Blackness, his gender, those are things that are implied into that work. But if you know anything about his research, his work ethic, his investigations, he was truly invested in abstraction, you know, abstraction across all mediums. I mean, taking canvas off of a stretcher is a form of protest, right? Yes. Like that in the time when he did that, like that was radical. You know, and I think about like that, like he was truly invested in just art, right? Devoid of everything else. Like that is something you have to give him credit for. He was a true artist, you know? And so this is part of another body of work I have called the Wash series, which is inspired by Morris Lewis's washes, which is, he don't call them washes, he calls them veils. And so the veil, again, was something I was equally invested in, you know, which the Du Boisian idea around the concept of legibility, illegibility, your experiences, double consciousness. And so in the Wash body of works, this is a scene of, you know, Black bodies engaging with one another. But Du Bois talks about the veil as something that we live within. And I love that. Like, that's a very surreal way of, you know, describing your environmental circumstance. Like we are those who live within the veil. So this is what, you know, the veil will look like to me. Right, it'll be this wash of abstraction that disrupts the legibility that was oftentimes presented to Black people, because that's what it actually is, you know. And then just
thinking about Fanon and thinking about that aspect of how he saw himself in regards to how people interpreted him, and then the overlap, the bleeding between of those things, where there was some kind of psychological acceptance on his part of what others thought of him that interfered with his own internal narrative of who he was. Or Hortense Spillers talking about the Black body being enfleshed, being seen as like moving on the mammalian flesh, devoid of the kind of intellectual humane kind of presence that we of course have, but that other people fail to see in us because they're paying attention to the historical marks, conceptual, of course, sometimes not, the
And
like
that's
marks of trauma on us rather than who we are.
Yeah, like that's very much. Have you read Black and Blur by Fred Moten?
Oh my God,
Yes.
I'm
You know, that's the thing that he also negotiates and he wrestles with, right? And like, if anyone knows, like, you know, Fred Moten, even Hilton Knowles, like, you know, these are things that even people of their caliber are still negotiating, right? Like how double consciousness literally changes, you know, and it's so, oh my God, it's so interesting because it's almost like white supremacy is like a virus, like the more intellectual, like, you know, and I guess like interrogation that we have towards it, it evolves, you know, it evolves and like tries to plague us in other and more like kind of covert ways. And I just appreciate Fred Moten and Hilton Knowles for really saying, you know, yeah, they're not having that. Like they're
Right.
going to interrogate this no matter what form it takes. You know,
Mhm.
how it does plague their you know, their day-to-day life. Fred Moten, like, to go, like, really incredible man.
I mean, the structure of white supremacy and the social structure it creates in our nation is the same structure that allows people to become infected with coronavirus because they are exposed to it and unable to get resources for it. So it's all connected. When you mentioned the Atlantic earlier, it's like there's a reason why all of our hurricanes every year are becoming these mega storms. It's because of pollution, and they travel the same path that we were forced to travel, in a sense, down that windward. And so it's all interconnected, and it's surreal, to use a term. It's surreal to see people not be able to accept the consequences of how they exist in the world.
You know, and I think what's incredible about that, I do think that, you know, I can't speak for everyone else, but I think, and I can't speak for all Black, but I do think Black people are a little more conscious about that than us. Because if you think about the times that we live in, even 2020 itself as a year has been an exceedingly surreal year, right? But the thing is, Black and brown people, we are familiar with surrealism, you know? Like the fact that the coronavirus, it's a very surreal virus, right? It attacks your respiratory system, right? Get that? Like it's completely structured to destroy you, right? To kill us, right? Like that's, no one knows anything about it. You would think people are making this shit up, which is what a lot of right wingers think, because they never had to deal with this kind of like surreal torment. We have, we've woken up plenty of days and questioned like, what the hell are we enduring? You know, like what is this? So it's become a way we've learned how to survive in it. So the fact that a pandemic or a coronavirus pops up, we are largely affected and killed off, right? But you don't hear Black people saying this shit ain't real. Like there's no shortage of Black people saying, no, like we actually might want to be okay, you know, like don't do anything, you know?
So John, can you talk a little bit about what's behind you?
Yeah, you know, the blue
And
paper.
Kilolo, I also want you to discuss how your like curatorial methodology for approaching the work.
Sure. But it would be great to hear a bit more about these paintings in your space, Tom.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover in here.
Well, you know, we can do some more highlights.
Yes.
That right there with the, yes.
So this is, I typically make monochromatic paintings because I am interested very much so in like the color field. So here's a painting of my friend Bree Brooks. This is a blue monochromatic painting or analogous colored painting. And this one was great because I was, it's in reference to a Carrie James Marshall painting where it's of a Black figure walking a dog. And the primary part of the composition is this super intense pink leash. It's like very vibrant leash. And so you can see like here, like the relation between the subject and their dog is because of that leash, which is the brightest part of the composition, right? But the only other parts of the composition that are equally bright would be the pieces of the swing, right? That lead you into the sandbox there. You know, this idea of absence, right? This idea of loneliness, despondency, displacement, right? These are all things I'm also negotiating with, like, you know, that particular painting.
She looks like she's swinging underwater.
Oh, I like that. Swinging underwater. And this is a study of a friend of mine's, Gabriel. These are works in progress, which will also be how, this will be a wash painting, but this is kind of how the washes start out. I actually depict the environment first, you know, because a lot of it's going to get sanded down and then I add the wash over it.
Okay.
And
you see, Jessica, how this horizon, this line is kind of changing and shifting within Dom's body of work in his space. That's something else that I've noticed, the evolution of that horizon is, and then how you're lowering it for these Albers pieces too.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things we're going to talk about also. So during the pandemic, and what has been a big blessing that I'm happy I'm able to show these works in the August Wilson Center, because they weren't originally a part of the original scheduled works. But because of the pandemic, I had time to kind of stop my traditional production, around works that people were somewhat more familiar with, like the primary color paintings or the washes. And I wanted to explore this idea of perception, which is like based on, in part, by Joseph Albers, who's the modernist, minimalist, abstract painter. And he talked about this idea of color as perception, right? Color is the thing that deceives. Color has the ability to change based off what you relate it to, right? So if you took two colors and related them to one another, they have the possibility to change, alter one another, or create a third color, right? And I think like there's a beautiful symmetry to like blackness in that sense too. Like blackness is entirely about perception. Like my blackness and my friend like Esteban's blackness would be very different, or blackness here versus blackness in Cuba would be quite different, right? But then you think about like how blackness is altered, right? Based off the context or in where you are and how people perceive you. So there's that relationship. But also you have the post-colonial idea of the third space, which is what happens when two opposing kind of like identities creates a new one, right? And like that is what, the artist Njideka Akinwumi Crosby negotiates in her work, being Nigerian and coming here in America. And like this new identity that's conjured out of that displacement, right? Like this identity is made out of necessity, is made out of happenstance sometimes, and because some of these factors you can't necessarily account for.
Or thinking about the power of melanin in nature even, because when you see octopus change color, or you see squid get scared and they spray, that they're what we call squid ink, or you see a chameleon change color, that's all them controlling the amount of melanin they allow to rise to their skin. And they create all of these colors out of melanin as it resides in nature. And also thinking about like squid ink or octopus ink, that's all melanin and other like mucus proteins that they're like emitting into the world. So thinking about the shifting of color being able to change and meaning and identity, thinking about Albert's relationship to it and everything you've said, it's very much a part of like our world.
And also, I would also say about this, how color is seen as this form of protection too within, Blackness. So that's another thing that's really appealing to me that I see in your work. So yeah. So you're talking about a little bit about my methodology. So that's something else that I speak about in there.
Yeah, and like all of those things are like, and it's just the fact how normalized these things fit into our lives, right? Like that's why it's not necessarily easy, but I think like these things make so much sense to me. Like this idea of the veil, the boys, this idea of perception from Joseph Albers, right? The wash, from Morris Lewis. All of these things for me are intertwined, right? I mean, you can't talk about perception without talking about the veil. To me, I don't think you can, right? Because the veil literally dictates that you need perception in order for us that to even exist. It's like the fact that like those two are incredibly related also fuels the practice. And I want to make sure that there is a parallel between each of these works. They're just like they are different, right? But like the ideas of my negotiation with each image, they all intertwine with each other. I'm not just going left field because I see a shiny new thing. Like I'm very careful about how do these things relate to one another, right? Because I would like for these works to exist in conversation. And to think about how ideas are translated, right? Like these are intellectual objects, right? Like these are things that you learn from, you engage with, and you ask questions of, And I understand that, reading and art, especially reading and art, are incredibly slow political tools, right? Like they're incredibly slow political tools. Like the things that you learn from them make sense when they're needed, right? So for example, James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time, people are turning to that book more often now and learning from it now than it was when he wrote that shit, like when we needed it, right? Like we're returning to these things, right? So now it's giving us a different way of engaging with the world around us, right? And I love that. I love thinking about how we return to certain things to help make sense out of the world that we're in right now, right? And that's the role I want my practice to have too. Things that you can turn to understand that these ideas are things that I have struggled with, and I hope to offer, the next artist guidance to how I navigated that path,
Right. We have a question from Heidi Zumbrunnen. So she says, I'm so intrigued by the art and literature connectivity. How can I best include the work in my curriculum?
So is she a teacher then? From that question, it seems like she might be.
She might be, yeah, like a teacher. Perhaps she's teaching literature. I'm assuming she teaches literature and trying to figure out how she can connect art and literature in her curriculum.
Huh. It depends on what she teaches. Like, I would be so curious, like, because if you taught like, history, I think it would be dope. If you taught art history, that could be another thing. If you taught like a media class, understanding art and media, like that could be one. How can I best include the work in my curriculum? Heidi, we can talk about, I could be a visiting artist. So like, we could just talk about it then. I'll come up and I'll talk to you.
Heidi, where do you teach? What school are you in?
Is she still connected to it?
Include the work.
Maybe she'll show up and she'll tell us. Heidi, if you're still watching, message and let us know what you teach and where you teach. And that way you can be put in touch perhaps with Kilolo and Dominic, and they could give you some curriculum advice.
Dominic, you'll tell people your Instagram too to follow as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's an AP literature teacher.
AP literature. Oh, I would say instead of like the work, I appreciate your interest in my work, but I'm not sure where you teach. You are a teacher. I would actually encourage you more to like think about the books that I read. Like one of the books I read, I unfortunately was not introduced to when I'm assuming like this might be high school. Like maybe is this high school or?
So AP Lit is high school.
Yeah, so
she's teaching in Wheeling, West Virginia.
Yeah, if you're in West Virginia, yeah, definitely read the books that inspire me. I would.
So the books we mentioned are Black and Blur.
Black and Blur.
Anything by Hortense Spillers you can find.
Yeah, Zora Neale Hurston.
Zora Neale Hurston.
Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde.
Junot Diaz, Brief Wondrous Life. Gene Toomer, very surreal in his descriptions of, like the nature and everything around, as opposed to these very hard concrete characters. What else did we say?
Oh, let's see. Well, we brought up Sojourner Truth too, but like, Ain't I a Woman? Like, a piece.
Fanny Hammer, I think also like her talking about like reproductive rights of Black women, speeches that she's given. If you're doing AP literature, hopefully you're covering a section when it comes to giving speeches. And so she's wonderful. Her talks are wonderful. The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin.
Now that I think is a book that everybody should be reading.
Right? The Bible. That's like the Bible.
Yes,
yeah.
You gotta read that book is absolutely imperative. Like that.
And if it's an AP class and you have the opportunity in your curriculum, when you're studying a text or an excerpt of the text, you might be able to bring up work by artists who've explicitly said, I was thinking of this when I made this. So that way you can show the influence that the literature has on others, on other artists, other writers. That could be fun.
And also what we can make available online for Dominic's show is a book, a list of books. And
if you follow me on, I have half a mind to start book reviews on my Instagram page. I've been toying around with this idea of like, because I love taking book recommendations. And I probably knock them out. I was like, I should review some books and share people what it is that I'm reading, as a hobby, because I'm thinking about this stuff anyway. Yeah. Just hop on, give it quick. So if you want to follow me, I might do that and just talk about different things I'm reading. It's an integral part to my studio practice. But we're running out of time a little bit, so make sure.
Oh, yes.
I'm like, oh, let's see what
you're like more.
So this is what's happening with the Joseph Albers work. So this is one, this is my friend Kentura. But then to think about this warm and this off warm color, like this cooler red versus this high intensity orange. But that color relationship. And I should also tell you, these palettes are all taken from Joseph Albers paintings. So I'll Google a particular painting of his, one that I think has a compelling color. Yeah. And I'll try to match those colors. Now, it's not going to necessarily be as accurate, right? Because this is a whole image and not just swatches of color. But I do use that logic whenever I'm constructing that image, And this is a piece that'll also be there. This is a little bit, I'm happy that this work is going to be there. This is my self-portrait of me engaging with a painting of mine that was in Sweden. And I love that this work is going to be here because that painting was about the Black body and its relationship to water, right? And I love it's a study for a larger work I want to do that deals with double consciousness. And this idea that as the studio can be a space where double consciousness also activates, right? And as opposed to the studio being double consciousness being depicted or dependent on the fact that I'm engaging with another person, but this idea that the studio is a place where you confront yourself, right? Like these ideas about yourself, ideas about your work, different themes. And who are you in your studio, right? Who are you there? Are you at peace? Are you not? Do you feel pressures? And I love thinking about that. Like that's something that artists like Philip Guston also negotiated, you know, and I love thinking about that, or like Peter Halley, and, you know, understand like that is a real thing. And
You're in composing your paintings and your drawings. Do you work from a photograph? Do you have models sitting for you?
I
I know
work
that's
from
something
photographs.
people had asked.
Now, when I first started, I would make like drawings for them, and I still like kind of sketch, kind of have ideas for like compositions. And I'll kind of position my friends like mannequins, like fit this composition, and then I'll like make a painting out of that. But sometimes I kind of improv it, you know, like this was a photograph for that particular work. And let's see, yeah, I sketch them out sometimes when I have like a general idea, like there are ideas I have like in the chamber, you know, and I have to like get bodies, like model those particular poses. But when I make my drawings, I just totally just sketch and let's make these large works on paper. But yeah, everything else like is either done from like a photograph, because I did think it mattered for these ideas to not be like, that's where the realism comes in, where these are real people, right? I needed the idea of like an actual body of people who I was familiar with. So that way I thought it would be a deeper connection. Like, you know, like this shit I'm not making up. Like these ideas are related to like these individuals who really do exist. You know, like I have an overactive imagination as it is. And I'm like, okay, I need to also like, where's the realism? Like that was a question that was asked to me when I was working with magic realism for a while. And when I was living in New York, doing the New York Studio Residency Program, Bill Powhida, he would always ask me in my studios, like, you know, there's a lot of magic happening here, but where's the realism? Like, where is that? Like, how can you pair those two? Right? You can't disjoint them if this is a interconnected thing, right? Because for me, it's like magic realism exists, period, right? And I didn't want to divorce the two. Now I just use it as a tool to negotiate broader, more complicated ideas. And so as we're moving along, I'll show the Amani work, which will be there, which is, Amani actually had a show at the August Wilson Center, and this is Amani.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite paintings because, well, one, I love Amani. And also I think this is probably one of the more successful Albert's paintings here. But this is my friend Amani. Let's see, I get you up close. So
Yeah, Monica Lewis is a Baltimore-based artist, and their work was at the center fall of last year. That's right.
right here.
Oh yeah, I take a picture of that right there.
Yeah, this is Amani, man. It has like the little raindrops. So these raindrop
I
motifs,
love it.
these were meant for me to be like the veil. Like the veil, if it could be seen through the lens of magical realism, it would be, you know, rain. It could be like, because rain for us in our environment literally blurs us, right? If you get caught in a storm, it literally functions as a veil. It veils our planet. So that's what it's supposed to be for me. It's supposed to be like a visual metaphor or a nod, that if the veil was something you could see or it could be tangible, it will look like those shapes.
Right.
It's really interesting, especially for you painting Amani and just knowing about their personality. They're so vibrant and just so welcoming and always just on the go too. Would you say, Jess?
Quick, fast.
Yeah, yeah. So to see Amani at rest, you know that they're thinking about some other things going on. So, Don, do you ever in painting these people in your paintings, do you ever talk to them about certain prompts or books that they're reading that then you pull into the paintings?
I don't. I mean, we have more casual conversations, and I was like, I think I'm a bit of a book nerd. And so like my friends like, oh my God, here he come over here trying to bring these books to the conversation. And I'm like, all right, I'll chill. I'll chill with that. I won't do it as much anymore. But no, I mean, we talk about ideas. Like Kevin and I have lots of conversations about just different things he's reading, but also like the ideas that he's negotiating in his work, you know? Like it's interesting because I'm not gonna say that, but yeah, we do talk about certain things. So when it comes, not necessarily the book, I kind of just like at Yale, people get upset with me because I wouldn't read all this like heavy theory. I just like would put it down to go back and read the things I was interested in, you know, because I just felt like I read it before. Like we've all read Kant, we've all read Kierkegaard. I don't need to like, my mind is colonized enough and I'm doing the work to uncolonize it, you know? I'm gonna dip out.
Yeah, when you don't play the game that everyone's trying to win at, it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is not. I just think that like Black voices are just as relevant. Like this, like Fred Moten is just as interesting as Kant, you know, to me, like in my mind, you know, or at least he negotiates ideas that I find to be much more relevant to like my existence.
And he's already taken Kant to task, I believe, in his previous scholarly writings. Like,
Or even just the idea of like what a classic is. I mean, to me, Baldwin is a classic,
Mhm.
you know, so that's something else. I think about these hierarchies that are established. So kind of decolonizing my mind is something that I'm always having to wrestle with and be very proactive about. So of undoing.
Yeah.
Right. And the undoing, it does take a lifetime, and it should, you know. It's about going on that adventure and understanding that this is like a critical continuous process to like decolonize your mind and understand it's like you can find everything that there is to find in the world in the work of, you know, global Black writers. You can, because we exist here too, although albeit through the veil, which makes a fractal of everything around us. We get to see it in its smallest parts because we're at that much risk of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 7 o'clock. We want to thank everybody for joining us. It was a very exciting, wonderful talk. Maybe when the show happens, we can do this again. Maybe it'll be a digital tour. That would be a lot of fun.
I would love
Yeah,
to.
Dom will be coming to town. So
Oh, that
Yeah.
would be wonderful.
yeah.
Yes.
All right, guys.
And also to find you on Instagram, Dom.
Oh, your Instagram, share.
Yeah, at Chambers Dominic.
Chambers Dominic, ChambersDominic.
Yeah.
And that's where you can find him. So we want to thank everybody. Janae's going to sign us off. Please have a good evening. Stay safe, and please be healthy.
Right.
Jessica, thank you, Dominic.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Janae.
Thanks, Janae.
Bye.